So we're going to be talking about this, and 2743 is the name of the course. Upgrading your skills to MCSA Windows Server 2016. A majority of these don't really matter. The main ones that we're going to be looking into is these are the things that we'll be covering in this course. So we'll be covering things like how to install and configure Windows Server 2016, describing the storage in Windows Server 2016, implementing directory service, ADFS, networking, Hyper-V, advanced networking features. They've got some really, really cool stuff in networking. Um, Implementing software-defined networking, again, some really, really good stuff. Remote access, Windows and Hyper-V containers. This is something that is new to Server 2016 around containers. Implementing failover clustering, and implementing failover clustering by using virtual machines. So these are really really good topics. Even if you're someone that's still on 2012, it's still something very good that you get some things from. And we'll follow this particular module system. So we'll be starting with this one, which is installing and configuring Windows Server 2016, which is all about installing Server 2016 because you have an environment, right? If you have an environment, you've got to you can just begin to manage Server 2016 if you've not installed Server 2016. So this particular module that we're discussing today is about installing and configuring Server 2016. And if you have a Server 2012 environment or 2008, how you can go about moving or upgrading to that. So we'll learn from one another and that. These are the main things that we'll cover, which are the Server 2016 introduction, um, installing and configuring it, preparing for upgrade and migration of Server 2016, and then how to migrate certain roles and workloads, and then the different activation models. So very first thing is that, I mean, if you're gonna be deploying Server 2016 in a production environment, you have to first of all identify what's the best edition or what's the right edition for you. There's different types of edition of Server 2016 that you can install. So we'll see them shortly. So for example, you're making the decision to maybe upgrade from 2012 to 2016, or you're making a decision to deploy a new server. Maybe maybe your company needs to deploy a new server application, and then you're thinking which operating system will it run on. You've decided you're going to use Server 2016. So the question is, what edition of Server 2016 will you use? And there's different editions that are available. But what I'll mention today is there are three core reasons. Okay, let me throw this question out to everyone first of all. To Benji, to Abdul, and to Abdul. So we've got two Abduls. So to Benji and to the two Abduls that are joining is that when selecting an edition of Windows Server, when you're thinking about what operating system to select, when you want to deploy a server application on top of an operating system, what are the things that you're looking at to make that decision?
If you need GUI or single server data center standard, or if you can use the new what's the small
Nano server, you mean? So that is talking about type. So we'll get to type in a minute. So this one is talking mainly about editions. So for example, actually, let's just go to the next slide. So if you go to the next slide there, these are different editions that are available. So this is not talking about, so I know what you're talking about in terms of server core or nano server. So that is different.
PALs, whether or not you need a foundation essential. I'm not sure if one of those, I think they got rid of one. I'm not sure, but maybe my information's old. But how many, if you need cows or not?
Yeah.
How many users, and then whether or not it's going to be highly virtualized.
Nice. So let's bring up this one. So MS Paint. So Benji says how many users would be one of the things. So who else wants to contribute to that? So Abdul Malik or Abdul Aziz. So what other things will you consider? So how many users? And what's the reason why you consider how many users, Benji? What's the significance of that?
the limitation of each version. So device and user limitation, and whether or not you can have multiple servers or you can only have single server. So essential and foundation only support 10 or 25 user, 25 or 50
Yep.
device. And then data center, you can pay a big price and run unlimited VMs
Hmm.
inside there.
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. Anybody? So what about Abdul? Abdul? Any of the two Abduls want to contribute? So what you've selected, you've decided you're going to be installing Server 2016. Now you've got to select your editions. What are the things that, as a system admin, you'll be using to make that edition? So this
Not
applies
sure.
not only to Server
Yes,
2016, to any operating system.
I probably would look at like what the licenses probably relate to the users as well, but maybe the what license are available.
Hmm.
Can you have how many virtual machines can you have?
Hmm.
Maybe what you really want to do. Like if you want to have what service you want to run on, you
Yep.
want to run it on, and maybe. Uh, I think if it's like a storage or if it's a DHCP or DNS server,
Hmm.
maybe that probably um, can give you an idea of what edition you can go for. Maybe
Yep.
if it's just a Hyper-V, you can go for a Hyper-V type,
Yep.
have a
specific type edition. So
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, that's my thought on that.
Yep. So you know what? What you've all said, it's all correct. So I can see Benji is also mentioning in the chat where it says plus roles and features. So every single thing that you've all said is absolutely correct. But what I'll try to do is I'll try to break this down to make it much more simple for all of us. When selecting an operating system, at least for me, yeah, so you could add more to this. There are three main things that you're looking at, three main things that is guiding your decision. Number one is the budget, right? And I'll break down that every single thing that both Benji and Abdul have mentioned all fall under one of these categories. Number two is the feature or the features. Number three is the scale or scalability. And I'll explain what that means. Number one, which is around budget, it's for example, we mentioned that these are the different editions that we have for Server 2016, or these are different editions. Each of these editions have different costs to them. I'll just mute start for a minute. Yeah, so each of these editions have a cost to them. The cost that you're going to pay for standard is different from the cost that you're going to pay for data center. The cost that you're going to pay for foundation is different from the cost that you're going to pay for essentials. So that obviously will guide your decision. The other thing that we put down and says that is going to guide the decision is around features, because both of these two work hand in hand. The more you're willing to pay, the more features you get access to. But it depends on which features do you want to use. So for example, um, for if you want to use certain features, they are not available in Foundation. So it doesn't matter whether Foundation falls within your budget or not. The thing is, what you want to use it for, it cannot perform that function. So because there are some functions you can install Hyper-V on Foundation, for example. I'm not sure if you can install Hyper-V on Essentials. Maybe you can, maybe you can. So there are certain features also comes into play in terms of what edition you'll be selecting. And the third one is around scale. That falls into what both Abdul and Benji mentioned around scale. Because, for example, you have limitations with Foundation. So they'll say limitation of you can only serve only about 15 users maximum. So that may fit into your current infrastructure now. But what happens if you go beyond that in the next 2 weeks? So these are the three main things that you have to consider when selecting an operating system decision. You have to consider the budget, you have to find out which features they can provide, and then you have to consider the scale that you want. And actually, we'll just bring up the document that will help us in relation to this. So let's go to this one, and this will help us. So if you look on here, you see Server 2016 standard edition. Let's reduce this just a little bit and look at the options. So you can see it supports almost all the roles and features. It can support up to 64 socket and 4 terabytes of RAM. It includes 2 virtual machines licenses. For Server Data Center, provides all of the roles and features, support up to 64 socket and 64 640 processor cores, up to 4 terabyte of RAM. If you're going to be using editions, you cannot use beyond 32 gig, and it only allows up to 15 users. So these are all the things. So you see, but everything that we've all mentioned, they all fall into those 3 categories of budget, the features that you'll be using, and the scale that you want to grow. How what's the limitation of how you're going to be growing. So all these fall into that category. But I'm not sure if anyone has noticed this. Anyone that is familiar with Server 2012 notice this difference. Look at this. Server 2016 standard edition provides many. Server 2016 data center edition provides all. Did anyone notice that? Benji, did you see that? Because that's something that's definitely changed. That wasn't the situation in Server 2012. Server 2012, you get all the features of Windows Server in standard edition. In Server 26, Server 2012 standard and data center, you get all the features. But now in 2016, standard no longer provides all the features. It provides many, but not all. Yeah, exactly. So, but that was in 2012. But in 2016, they are not the same anymore. So in 2016, when we get into the new features, you see, there are some features that are only available in data center now. Not SDN. So there's it's not SDN, it's rather SDS, software defined storage. Something called, we'll get to that in a minute. They call it storage spaces direct and storage replica. Those 2 features, if you buy Windows Server 2016 standard, you can't use storage spaces direct and you cannot use storage replica. That is only available in data center edition. Yeah, exactly. So that's all the whole concept of convergence and hyperconvergence, like Benji mentioned in the chat window. So it's one of the things. So is that clear, or does anyone have any questions regarding that? Regarding what are the things that you're going to be considering when selecting your operating system edition that you'll be using, and what is available to you for each edition? Is everyone clear about that, or does anyone have any question before we move to the next one? Any question? Shazad, you okay? Any questions? About Abdulaziz, you've been very quiet also. Any questions from your end?
Question. That's okay. It's okay.
Okay, nice. And Abdulaziz, you okay?
Say it again, please.
No, I said, is Abdulaziz okay also?
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Are you okay with that? And then let's move on.
Yes.
Okay, yeah. So
Yes,
we'll move on
clear,
then.
clear.
Okay, so the next thing that I want us to know when it comes to this is, because for most people, they are not, most people have not yet upgraded from Server 2008 to 2012. And this is the point, because Server 2008, at some point, support will stop for Server 2008. And those people most likely will upgrade to Server 2016. So what they're trying to do is so that you won't be completely shocked if you just go from 2008 to 2016 and then you see a bunch of features and you're like, oh my God, where did all this come from? So what they're basically saying here is, here are some new features that were introduced in Server 2012 so that at least you have some basic ideas of this. So these are new features. If you're going from 2008 to 2012, they added a feature for work folders. Does anyone know what work folders is? Has anyone used it in a production environment before?
Which feature?
Work folders.
Just for the test. I don't use it in production.
In production, yeah. And if you can explain it just for us, so that we just have a quick overview. We don't need to go into details, just what it does and stuff.
I believe it's for kind of over the web you can mount a folder versus doing folder redirection.
Yeah, yeah, that's absolutely right. So what that means is basically you're trying to set up your own version of corporate Dropbox, which is not it's not exactly the same, but that's basically what you're trying to set up. Your own version of. So you think about your users. Your users have their own personal devices and they have the corporate devices. Now, the truth is, many of your users are already at this moment copying corporate data away from corporate, corporate systems to their own personal devices, right? Bring your own device. So they're copying your data, going home to their own laptops, plugging USB into insecure laptops and working on that. So what they're doing with work folders is to try to encourage to say, you know what, rather than you just doing that, we'll provide you a means where you can access all your folders at work from your own personal device. So what we'll do is we'll publish your folders kind of like on the internet, and then you can connect to it using Android devices, iOS devices. It doesn't support Windows Phone, I think. So I think just Android devices and iOS devices and Windows clients, and I think maybe Mac and some Linux client. So you can connect internally to your folders. And then as you're working, and then the synchronization takes place. So that's like what work folders is about. So that was in Server 2012. If you're doing MCSA 2012, you come across this. Next one, DHCP failover. I have used this in production. I think I have this deployed in production. In fact, this is like the default method. Yeah. Yes, Benji. So I think this is like the default method that they use and that I use now whenever I'm deploying DHCP server. So Shazad, where are you in your studies? Are you currently, have you done your MCSA? I know Abdulaziz have done your
Yeah,
7410. Have you done, so
I
you've completed your
yeah
MCSA?
I just recently completed my exams, and I just moved here in USA,
Yeah,
and basically I'm working in Exchange servers. Like that's my like I have my expertise area, like Exchange server
yeah,
and Active Directory
yeah,
and VMware side.
yeah. That's very nice, man. So you should know what? You should know this one then. You should know DHCP failover. That was in 7412. DHCP failover. Do you know what it does?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. I know, but I didn't work. Like I didn't install that feature
But
in my production.
yeah. So
Because we are using another server for the it's just from the routers they are configured in our production, but I never use that features in our production.
okay. Yeah. So
Yeah.
yeah, basically what DHCP failover means is in the past, if you want DHCP to be highly available, so what you do is you configure two DHCP servers and then you do something called a split scope. In other words, you have a scope of IP addresses on one server, the other scope on the other server. So typically you do a 70-30% split. So 30% of your IP address space you put on one DHCP server, the remaining 70% on the other DHCP server, so that if one of them fails, the other one can still carry on issuing DHCP addresses and to new clients on the network. So that's all well and good, but DHCP failover takes it to a high level where you don't even have to split the scope. Both DHCP servers can be enabled at the same time. And also the problem with using a split scope is that if I get my IP address from the server that does 70%, right? And then that server fails. I cannot renew my IP address whenever I want to renew my lease. I cannot renew my lease with the server that does 30% because as far as they're concerned, they're completely two different DHCP servers. So I can't renew my lease to that. I have to wait for the lease to expire and then get a new address if any is still available on the other one. But with DHCP failover, what I can do is I can renew my lease. If one of them fails, I can still renew my lease with the other one, and then both DHCP servers are communicating with one another. They know when one of them has failed and stuff like that. So basically, you can have this full scope running on two servers at the same time, and you're not going to be getting issues. Okay, IPAM, IP address management, something new introduced in Server 2012. I'm not sure too many companies will probably use this, maybe apart from small, medium businesses. Dynamic access control in Server 2012 is a way to extend authorization. So like for example, when you're doing Authorization is just NTFS authorization, right? You're trying to access a folder. It's checking and saying, do you under the security tab? Does this user have access to this under the security tab? That's all. But then you can take it a step further from just checking for your username or whether you're in this group member. Sorry, whether you're a member of this group. You can take it a step further by saying, okay, hold on, what role, what type of document are you trying to access? Is it a sensitive document that you're trying to access? What sort of device are you trying to access this sensitive document from? And based on all those information, it can allow you access or deny you access, even though your name is under the security tab as having access to this folder, still you may be denied access to that folder. Yep, Netbox is a good one, Benji. And then we have data deduplication. This one is really cool. Abdul, is that something that you've heard of before, used like for Windows 2012 in data deduplication?
Hello.
Hello.
Yeah. Data deduplication. I think I've read it
Yeah.
in studying for the 410, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah.
It's basically a feature that enables you basically to look at files in your storage and then remove any duplications.
Yeah.
I think you can have
Absolutely.
just one copy of that file.
Yeah.
That saves you basically storage
Yeah.
instead of having
And
duplicates.
I can tell you from experience, this is absolutely amazing. Absolutely. The thing is, you cannot use them on OS drives, but you can use them on data drives. But it's absolutely amazing. I in my lab environment, the server is off downstairs, so I can switch it on. But in my lab environment, because I have lots of server 2012 servers on the same disk that I'm using for testing and stuff, I have this running and it's saving me. So the disk itself is around 500 gig of storage, and it cut it down and saved me over 300 gig of storage, because it's only gonna, like Abdul mentioned, it's only gonna save a single copy on disk. It's gonna save only a single copy of that data, and then it's gonna do pointers to that data. So rather than saving the same copy of data twice, it will save it once and then point to it. So that's what that does. Storage spaces, it's a way to create a form of software-defined storage where you can get bunch of hard disks together, use them to create a volume in Server 2012. Storage tiers, also better domain controller virtualization. So in the past, it used to be that if you have a domain controller, if you do something like a snapshot rollback, you roll back to a previous snapshot, that can cause trouble. Does anyone know why that will cause any trouble? Benji, do you know why that will cause any trouble?
Well, you never want to, restore a domain controller because of the time, the SID, and everything.
What exactly? So you're absolutely correct, but there's a particular time I'm looking for.
Everything.
There's a particular time. So you're correct, Benji, but there's a particular time I'm looking for when it comes to domain controller virtualization and terms of like snapshot rollback and things like that. Anyone? Shazad?
A particular term you're saying?
So something about something rollback, it's called.
Oh, is it like one of the FSMA roles, like RID?
This one. So after this one, if you Google USN rollback and read about this, so this will let you know why the danger of that. So USN rollback, go Google it and read about it. So that's the reason why you can't just go restore a domain controller. You can't just roll it back, because you can get into this issue where you have a USN rollback, and then it can even lead to a corrupt Active Directory database. So USN update sequence number, because whenever you make any change in Active Directory, the update sequence number increases. But then if you roll it back, you can cause trouble. Okay, so that's where this one. And cloning. So what they did in 2012 is they introduced something called a generation ID. As an attribute of domain controllers in Server 2012. And what that allows is that if you do, yeah, exactly. Yeah. So if you do a rollback of a domain controller. When domain controller comes back, using the generation ID, it can detect that I have been rolled back to a previous snapshot. And when it comes back, it won't start replicating itself to other domain controllers. It's going to be quiet, replicate from other domain controllers first, make sure it's replicated everything from other domain controllers first, and then it will go out and now start replicating itself. So it's a new attribute. So also, if you can Google that, if you can Google 7 2012 how to generation ID, and you see VM generation ID support. I think VMware vSphere now supports it also, but that's basically the whole concept of generation ID. Um, which you see here also, USN rollback, virtualized DC is an improvement in Server 2012. And this one goes into a lot of detail. So you want to read this article. It's a very good one to understand. It will help your understanding of Active Directory also. You know why, but then since 2012, they've improved this. And obviously now in 2012, you can clone domain controllers also. So you can clone a domain controller and then it gets its database from that. So those were the things that were in 2012. Now, 2016, what do we have? We have this. We have Nano server, we have containers. Now we're beginning to see some strange terms that IT pros are not used to before. Things like containers and Docker. IT pros are like, whoa, are you not talking about development here? And then you find the standard things like rolling upgrades. Yeah, we know about that. Auth add, nested virtualization. Oh, okay, yeah, I think AWS. Yep, maybe most likely, most likely AWS. So they still have a lot of stuff for us IT pros, but then they have some stuff here, especially these two that targeted towards developers. But you as an IT pro still have to manage that. So let's start from the first one, Nano server. Has anyone ever used Nano server before? Ever? Or you've heard about it, but do you know what it does? It's one of the things that I put in this Hangout introduction to say if you've not heard about Nano server, join this hangout and we'll talk about Nano server. Small footprint. Yep, Benji, small footprint.
Nano server, if I understand about this one, like it's have some small features, maybe not too much, and you can get the advantage from this nano server.
Hmm.
Is it?
Yeah, it is. But let's go to this. So can you see my screen? You can still see my screen, right?
Yeah.
This is an example of a Nano server that you're seeing on my screen. Can you see that? So this is a Nano server. Let's go. I'm logged into a Nano server now. And look at what I've got. I've got no command. So, before in the past, so Benji says no GUI. It's not even no GUI. It's no GUI. It's no command prompt. Basically, you get this Nano Server Recovery Console. And that name tells you that they don't expect you to log into this server physically in any way. In other words, before in the past, right, you had Windows Server with the full UI. Then you had Server Core. Server Core, you log into the Windows server and all you get is a command prompt. And you're like, okay, I get a command prompt. I can still run PowerShell. But then you log into this one and you get nothing. You get no command prompt, you get nothing. They're like, we don't expect you to log into this except you want to do a recovery. So you configure it, everything is all off. And here's the main thing about Nano server. So typically, a Windows server, there's a lot of reasons for doing this. Like a Windows server, if you install it, typically it's around, I think, 3 to 4 gig in size. If you install a server core machine, a Windows server core machine, which is the one where you just get the command prompt, right? That is typically around 1.3 gig in size. This one is around 500 meg in size, a Nano server. And what that means is this. If you have an Hyper-V server, right, you can deploy more servers on the same Hyper-V servers, number one. Because in the past, because Windows server is so huge, it's like 4 gig each. Now, in place of one Windows server, you can deploy maybe around 8 of this. and it can still perform the functions that you want it to perform. There are some functions that it can't perform, but for the ones that it can perform, it performs it same as a Windows server. Taking that a step further, what that means is this: when it comes to you as an um, IT administrator, for example, just to give an illustration, last year, if you were running a Windows Server 2012, I can't really remember the number. Let's say you have about 20 reboots that you will have done with Windows Update. So the all Windows updates that they released last year, you will have had to reboot because there are some updates that don't apply until you restart the system. So last year, maybe you've done a total of like 20 reboots. If you're running a server core system, you probably have done a total of maybe about 8 reboots. If you're running this one, you probably have done only one reboot. So you have that stability in terms of there's a very small footprint, like what Benji said. That means there's very little to update. There's very little to patch. And here's the other thing. If I restart this server, how many seconds, how many minutes do you think it's going to take for this server to boot up? It's less than 5 seconds. If you reboot a server 2012 full UI, good luck. You have to wait for a while, right, before it comes back up. Do the same for a server core machine. It takes a while. This one, you shut it down, within a few seconds, it's back up. So in other words, short deployment time, like if you want to deploy a full server 2012 machine, it's going to take long to deploy it, right? Because it has to extract all this file. Same with server core. This one, you have a very, very small deployment time, small startup time. So imagine running this as your Hyper-V server, where you reboot your Hyper-V server and it comes back up in 5 seconds, right? And imagine your Hyper-V server, you only have to reboot it once in a year because there's really not that much to update from it, right? So that's like the main thing, the drive regarding Nano server. So it's just Windows server also. You can't use it for every single features. There are some features that you cannot use it for. So you can use it for Active Directory. But I'll mention the main thing that this is very popular for. It's very popular as an Hyper-V server, and it's very popular as something called scale out file server, which is something that we'll discuss when we get to the module on storage. When we get to the module on storage, we'll discuss scale out file server and also no, not this one, also clustering. So talk about scale out file server. But does that make sense, or does anyone have any questions regarding Nano server so far?
Can you repeat the 3 or 4 use cases you just said?
So number one is Hyper-V, is the most popular one, right? Because that means your underlying virtual infrastructure is very stable. If you have to build it, it takes you less time to build it. If you have to restart it, it takes it few seconds to come back up. Also, in terms of maintenance, there's very little to patch, so you probably won't have to reboot it except once in a year. And also think about if you have this as even like as a VM and you're doing a VM, something sort of like a vMotion. You're moving a virtual machine from one host to another. In the past where it has to take a long time to be copying all these files over, it just goes because it's just 512, it just moves. So those are the two carry on. Sorry.
Do they still require domain membership for like vMotion?
I think we'll probably get to that in Hyper-V. I'm not sure if they still require it.
I know that was one thing. The first time I ever moved a machine, that's when I moved to VMware. But the first time I tried it, I had to join my Hyper-V host to the domain.
It's something that I'll check out. I think that must have changed. I think that, oh, I won't say must. I think that might have changed, but I'll check that out. I think that might have changed. Yeah. So it's mainly popular for two things. So Hyper-V server scale out file services. You can also run DHCP and other different light roles on it. But that's like the whole point in this one, right? But then the thing is, you can't really do that much management locally. If you look at it, the only options you have in terms of management locally is so that you can enable remote management. so that you can enable WinRM, which is Windows Remote Management. You can enable inbound and outbound firewall rules and configure networking. And then after that, you can do nothing. You have to get off, either use PowerShell remoting. You cannot even RDP into this. You can't use remote desktop. Like in the past, for server core, you can use remote desktop to RDP into a server core machine. But with this one, you cannot even use RDP. You can only do PowerShell remoting. That's all. And okay, so let's move on. So does that make sense, right? So let's move on to the next one. Okay, containers. Has anyone ever heard of containers before? Have you heard of containers before? You're muted, Shazad. Yeah.
Yeah, I heard about the container, but like I don't know about this feature. Which like what kind of features in 2016? Like containers means like in our Active Directory we are using.
Oh, so this one is not that. So this one is a different type of container completely. So this one is a different type of container. What about Benji and Abdulaziz? Have you heard of containers before?
So for sandboxing,
Yeah.
kernel.
hmm So yeah, you're right, Benji. You're on the right, you're on the right track in terms of sandboxing kernel. So what that means is think about if you're a developer, you're writing your applications, right? You're writing your applications. You've written all these applications. You run it in your QA environment. Everything is running. You give it to your IT pro guy. You say, deploy this to the web server. This is the new version of our web application. IT pro guy deploys your application to the web server, and then it's not working. And then they find out, oh, the new one that I wrote requires .NET 4.5, but the server that the IT pro guy deployed it to does not have .NET 4.5. The whole point is what a development guy is writing is impacted by what is on the server that the IT pro. Oh, sorry. Cancel. Oh, sorry. Sorry. I'm not sure what happened, Shazad. Sorry. I think I clicked something wrong. Sorry about that. Can you still hear us though?
Yeah, I can see.
Okay, yeah,
It's
nice. Okay, yeah.
okay.
Yeah. Okay. So, yeah. So what that now means is that you as a developer can write your code, and not only your code, everything that your code needs to run. If your code needs .NET or whatever thing that you need, you can package it with the code, give it to the IT guy. The IT guy deploys that, and whatever happens on the operating system will not affect the running of your code. So the IT guy can go install .NET whatever on it on the operating system. It's not going to affect it because your code was deployed in a container, which is like a mini version of Windows Server, and everything that your code needs to run is included in that container. So we'll see a demonstration of this because this is introduction. We'll see a demonstration of this, then it's going to make more sense. And these two are interrelated. So because Windows have an agreement with Docker now, and they support Docker containers, so you can deploy Docker containers directly on Windows. So the best way to see this is when we get to one of these. Let's see which module is that. When we get to one of this module, we'll actually do a demonstration of containers. I can't see which one, but one of them we're going to do a demonstration of containers and Docker, and then you see what that means. Rolling upgrade for Hyper-V and storage clusters. What that means in a nutshell is this. In the past, so let me bring a diagram to quickly demonstrate this. So in the past, if you had a cluster of servers, so this cluster is 2008 machines in a cluster. You have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You have 6 machines in this cluster. So this is a 2008 R2 cluster. Now, server 2012 comes in, you want to upgrade this cluster. That used to be a very big work in the past because what you have to do in the past is you can't use this cluster anymore. Basically, you have to build a new cluster from scratch. Then you have to start building new 2012 R2 servers, 6 of them, and now start transferring all the settings and data and everything from this one to this new cluster. And after you do that, then you shut this one down, and then this one becomes the active one. That used to be a task because basically you have to rebuild everything again. because you cannot put a 2008 R2 server and have a 2012 server in this cluster. It doesn't work. So basically, you have to rebuild a new cluster from scratch. But that changes with 2016. With 2016, if I have the minimum requirement is a 2012 R2 cluster. So that's 2012 R2. So all these servers are 2012 R2. If I want, I can upgrade one of these to 2016. If I want, I can introduce a new 2016 server into this cluster and it's going to work. What it's going to do is going to operate on something called a compatibility level. So it's going to operate on 2012 R2 compatibility level. In other words, it won't use all the features of 2016. You can only use features of 2012. But the good thing is now you can have 2016 servers and 2012 R2 servers in the same cluster. So you introduce a new node or upgrade any of the nodes. So you can start upgrading them one by one. Upgrade this one to 2016, upgrade this one to 16, upgrade this one to 16, upgrade this one to 16, and it's not affecting your cluster in any way. Your services are still running, no downtime at all. Once everything is upgraded to 2016, then you can run a PowerShell command to change this from 2012 out to compatibility level to 2016 compatibility level. At this point, after you change it to 2016 compatibility level, you cannot roll back anymore. But before then, you can still roll back. But you get the point. Now you can upgrade a whole cluster without any downtime. You can just, because as this one is upgrading in 2016, the other 5 are taking the load. This one comes back, it continues working. You upgrade this one 2016, the others are taking the load. So by the time you finish, everything is upgraded 2016. Or if that's not the method that you want, you can start introducing in 2016 servers into the cluster. They will synchronize everything. And after you finish, start removing 2012 servers from that same cluster. And you have zero downtime. And you've upgraded the whole cluster. So that is what this one is referring to. Rolling upgrade for Hyper-V and storage clusters. So it's a very, very good one. Anyone that has clusters will be happy to have this. This one is very explanatory, alt add and alt remove. So now in Hyper-V, you can alt add memory, network adapters, while the machine is running, and that. Nested virtualization, finally. Finally, we have nested virtualization, where you can have a VM inside a VM. Inside a VM, inside a VM, inside a VM. So, but the good thing, here's one thing about this one, is that as IT pros, we've been asking for nested virtualization for a long time from Microsoft. Give us nested virtualization. They didn't do anything about it. But because of developers, they gave us nested virtualization because the main reason for nested virtualization is because of the running of containers. That's why. That's why we finally had nested virtualization. Because now there are two types of containers that you can run. You can run the containers that is sharing the kernel of the operating system, but you can also run a container that is completely isolated from the operating system. They call them Hyper-V containers. That is the reason why they give nested virtualization. Because now you have this, whatever happens on the kernel doesn't impact the application that you've deployed on it in any way. So, but we'll get to that when we get to that. So if you Google Hyper-V containers, you see more information about them. They are new. So create and run Hyper-V containers. So you can run them on Windows 10 also if you want to. So you can say Hyper-V containers and you see Docker command support. And you can see there are two types of containers that you can run. Windows Server containers, which can run on a host, isolation provided, but the containers share the same kernel with the host. But Hyper-V containers, there's even kernel isolation between the container and the host. But it's because of this that we finally have nested virtualization. Any questions so far? Benji, Shazad, Abdul, any questions so far?
No question.
Is everything really clear so far?
Well, I'm just trying to understand. Like, can you repeat it again? Nested virtualization. I didn't understand exactly.
Yeah. Also, Benji, do you understand nested virtualization?
Sorry, I had to move some stuff around.
Ah,
So
no,
I
it's all
missed
right.
all.
Yeah. Do
What
you
was the question?
I said, do you understand nested virtualization?
Nested virtualization.
Yeah.
So if you have a type 1 hypervisor,
Mhm.
trying to install another type 1 hypervisor inside of a type 1 hypervisor.
Mhm. Yeah, exactly. So, because Shazad was asking, so I was looking. So Shazad was asking the question, so I wanted you to explain to help to explain to him. But
Yeah,
let
so
me,
a lot
yeah.
of people for labbing, they want to install vSphere inside of, or even a Type 1 hypervisor inside of a Type 2 hypervisor. So you need VTD or whatever the actual motherboard components that allow virtualization. You can only have one operating system grabbing those. So then you need another virtualization layer to allow a nested virtualization to go on top of that. So a lot of people are running Windows and then they'll install VMware Workstation and then they'll try and install ESXi, which is a bare metal operating system inside of an application that's inside of a regular operating system. So
Yeah.
that's kind of
Yeah.
you're breaking the rules of, you don't want to do it in production, but for testing and school and everything like that, that's what a lot of people will do.
Yeah.
Allows you, running VMware Workstation. Typically, you would just install an operating system there for Windows 7 or 10 or server, but not Hyper-V or ESXi or VirtualBox or whatever.
Mhm. Yeah.
It's all
So,
about accessing the motherboard hardware, the Intel chipset, that type of thing.
yeah. So Shazad, in a nutshell, what it means is that you've got your physical machine, you install Hyper-V on this. So you
Okay.
install Hyper-V on this, and normally you have your virtual machines running on top of Hyper-V, right?
Okay.
But what that now means is that you can even take this virtual machine and install Hyper-V on this virtual machine again.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
So before in the past, you install Hyper-V on the host, then you have virtual machines. But then you have a virtual machine, but you now install Hyper-V inside the virtual machine. So, but
Mm.
it's something that we've been asking for a long time as IT pros, but because of developers, we finally have it in Server 2016. PowerShell Direct is a quick one where if you have a Hyper-V host, as we explain here, you have a Hyper-V host. So this is your Hyper-V host. You don't need network connectivity to these virtual machines to be able to run PowerShell commands on them. So in the past, it used to be these virtual machines for you to run PowerShell commands remotely, they have to be on the network. So now you can have this machine completely isolated from the network. From the host, you can use something called PowerShell Direct to basically run remote PowerShell command on this machine, do all your configuration, then join into the network. So this is something that is like new in Server 2016, where you can directly, without any network, so this is not using network configuration, without any network configuration on this virtual machine, you can connect to it directly using PowerShell remoting. So that's what this one. Shielded VMs. This is a very powerful one. I know Benji is like a VMware guy. I'm not sure if this is available on VMware on vSphere yet. So shielded virtual machine is where you're protecting the virtual machines that are running from the administrator themselves. So because you're a fabric administrator of an Hyper-V host, does not mean you can do everything on it. You can do management tasks, but anything that has to do with accessing data or accessing the console, shielded. If you have a VM that is a shielded VM, it's basically a VM that is protected from the administrator himself.
Mm-hmm.
That's what this one is. That's what shielded VMs is. So for
Yeah. Yeah.
example, as an administrator in the past, if let's say I'm the administrator of this Hyper-V host, and this is one of the VMs running on it, now this VM will have a virtual hard drive. As an Hyper-V administrator on this machine, I can have access to this virtual hard drive, copy it to a USB, take it to another machine, mount it into a Windows operating system and start looking into it. I can right click a virtual machine and go to the console if I've got access, right? And I can start. But that changes as if you deploy something that is a shielded VM, it's completely different. You go to the console, you cannot access the console. You can manage it, you can do whatever you want, you can move it around, do whatever, but you cannot access the console. You go to the VHD, you try to mount it, you can't. It's all encrypted. So it's something to protect even the VMs and the data within those VMs from the fabric administrator themselves. Windows Defender is pretty straightforward. These are the two ones that we mentioned that these are not available on standard edition of Windows Server. So storage spaces direct and storage replica. But we'll talk about these two when we get to, yeah, I think. So we'll talk about this. So okay, so let's move on a bit. I know it's been a while. Should we take a short coffee break, or should we continue? What do you want? Do you want us to take a short coffee break, or should we continue?
Yeah, sure.
Short
I
coffee.
think
Yeah. Okay. Let's take a short coffee break, and then we'll continue afterwards. I'll go get some coffee.
okay.
Yeah. Any questions or contributions regarding for what we said so far? Hello, can you hear me?
I just kind of missed the part since Docker and forward, but
We have it. So in one of the future ones, we've got demonstrations on Docker and containers. So we will be
I just
going
didn't
into
know
that.
if there was anything important that just in your slide. I can't see your slide right now. I can
Yeah.
just see the picture of
Yeah. So I got the other one, so I can move to the slide now.
Shazad.
Yeah, this one. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So also about containers, all you need to know is that. Carry on. Sorry.
Did you go through? Or yeah, you talked about the rolling
Yeah.
upgrades, for the and storage cluster, hot outer. Yeah, I understand. And this virtualization. So yeah, just that. So you stopped at the nested virtualization. So
No, I've gone through everything.
oh,
Did you miss PowerShell Direct? Okay, so let's test our knowledge then. So I think Shazad, you were around when I was discussing PowerShell Direct, right? I'm not sure if Abdul was around.
they may
Shazad,
still,
are you there, Shazad?
they may still be on a break, or who knows.
Yeah, maybe. Well, what
Yeah,
about
I just
Abdul? Are you there, Abdul?
missed some of that part.
Hello, Shazad and Abdul. Yeah, so why just I'll just a quick, very, very brief review because we'll have to move on regarding PowerShell Direct is you've got a Hyper-V machine. So this is the one that I've got. I've got it in the diagram that I used for illustration here, where you've got an Hyper-V host. Sorry, you got a Hyper-V host running here, right? You got your VMs running on top of this Hyper-V host. Now, before you've got to have this VM on the network to be able to do any form of PowerShell remoting on it, right?
Oh, okay, I see
Yeah,
what you're saying.
yeah. So, but now you don't need to have that because from within the hosts, you can connect using PowerShell Direct without any network connectivity on this VM, and you can do PowerShell remoting. And what that allows you to do is, let's say you've got a VM that you don't want to be on the network in any way, till you finish every single configuration, you can still configure it using PowerShell remoting without any network configuration. So from the
So it's kind of like clicking the console screen
exactly, it's kind of
there or
like a
whatever.
console PowerShell.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's called PowerShell Direct. And then you've got shielded virtual machines, which is what shield. So it's called a protected virtual machine. So you can have a generation one machine generated two machines, and you can have shielded virtual machines, which is
Yeah,
a
I think
yeah, carry
that's
on.
kind of like encryption that they can do
Yeah,
for if you have somebody hosting your cloud for you,
yeah,
it's encrypted.
yeah.
Is that the shielded virtual machine?
Yes, it is. So in other words, so because in the past, you got a VM here. Normally, you have this Hyper-V, the administrator that is managing this Hyper-V host. It's kind of like a mini god, right?
Right.
On these hosts. So it can go look into all the VHD files, copy them, move them anyhow. So as you're working, there may be a malicious Hyper-V administrator that is already copying your VHD into a USB drive. So for
Right.
example, let's say this is a domain controller, copies the VHD of this domain controller, copies it off. I'm on a Windows 10 virtual machine. If I go under disk management, I can just copy your VHD on a USB, go under disk management and just mount the VHD. And
Right.
now I can see the content. And now if it's an Active Directory server, I can now go to your, what's it called? I can go to attach
Database and
VHD. Yeah. I can look for your ntds.dit, which is
yep,
your Active Directory database.
yep.
I can go download different tools online and run it against that, and it's going to extract passwords for me. So at the end, I'll have a list of usernames and passwords. And now I have something I can use to start attacking you. I can just log in as an administrator if I'm able to compromise an administrator password, and I can start attacking your network. But now, if you've got shielded VMs, for example, if the malicious, even though he's an Hyper-V administrator, even though he's the administrator for this Hyper-V host, can go and say, I'm going to copy this VHD off. It can't access anything in it. It's completely encrypted.
Yeah.
It's a shielded VM. But not only that, if it goes to the console, right? And it's like, oh, I will just open the console of this virtual machine and see what's going on or whatever. It can't even open the console. It's the administrator. It can still perform administrative functions, but it can't even open the consoles. Even though it's the administrator of this machine, except it's been given explicit right to be able to do that. So does that make sense? So it's a way because it's one of the things, one of the main trends that is happening in security is that there's a lot of focus on securing identities now. You have to be able to protect even from a malicious administrator.
Yeah, I'm having a lot of issues. One
Yeah.
thing I didn't understand about like when you disable UAC
hmm
and then your file, your context, once you've disabled UAC, sometimes like you'll be on a file server and then you'll try and do something to a file and then it'll say your own name is the owner of the file, even though you are you. You know what I'm saying?
hmm
So say you disable UAC, then it would be like cannot access file. File is owned by David. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
there are some issues with dealing with file servers when you go into it. It's once you've disabled UAC, it doesn't add an additional token that can that should be on there, and then it's just something hidden in NTFS and UAC to where even though you're you, it doesn't think that you're the same you.
hmm
Like you don't have the same rights on the file server.
hmm
That and then also issues with like I'm a Veeam administrator, so I have issues with once I install like a Veeam agent onto a server, when I'm trying to do a backup, if I don't have access, I don't want access to people's user profiles. Once I install the Veeam agent, then I have to run it as some sort of administrator. But if it's me as the administrator, I've taken myself away from it. So then I don't necessarily have a backup for their files. So yeah, there's a lot of permission stuff that I have to work through
hmm
to make sure that I'm, you know, another administrator creates a share, and if he doesn't do it correctly or include me, then I look and I say, hey, that's good that you did that to keep me out,
hmm
but now we have no backups.
Yeah. But there are ways to achieve it where you can even have backup. You're able to take backup, but then you can't do more than that. You're able to take the backup, but you cannot view the file. So stuff like that. So because that's like the drive. Because if you look about at things like um, the explosion of cloud technologies, right? Things like people hosting your data. You want to be able to protect your data in case There's like a rogue administrator somewhere.
Right.
Yeah, so it's one of the drives that you see in IT security. There's a whole lot of drives in that, in terms of that. Okay, let's move on a bit. My Hyper-V server is playing up here because I wanted to do some demonstration. But let's move on. Okay, Ishazad and Abdul, are you back?
Oh, okay, sir. I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
no, it's all right. Absolutely okay.
I'm
Oh, yeah.
trying new US food here.
Yep, I do understand. No problems.
Yeah.
Okay, so then next thing, integration with Microsoft Cloud Services. So one of the things that you have in Server 2016 is you have these things where, due to what we're just talking about now, cloud services explosion, you can have you can integrate directly with different cloud services from within the Microsoft server. Now, one of the things that you have to do is you may have to have um, something called Windows Server Essentials Experience installed to be able to get this console. So if you're running like a server standard, let me
Oh,
bring
this
it. Yeah,
essential. Yeah,
yeah. Oh, oh,
essential.
what are you gonna say? Sorry.
No, I was wondering. That's the essential role. Like I manage a couple of essential servers, so that's why I was looking. This is the new essential role for.
Yeah, this is one. Yeah. So basically, I can have this server now, and I can go under hardware and features. And if I go under here, Windows Server Essentials Experience, this one. So I can run this, and what this will allow me to do is it's gonna add that dashboard for me. And from there, I'll get a dashboard like the one that we saw in this on the slide. So after this one completes, this one is still running. Let's see what the issue is. Uh, okay, let's go back. Okay, so after this one finishes, you get something like this where I can go and integrate with Azure Active Directory. Intune, I can configure backup to Azure directly. I can configure recovery to Azure directly from that. Okay, hardware requirements, overview of installation. So some of this we already talked about. Like in terms of hardware requirements, they've got a very, very small requirement of 64-bit processor. Oh, one of the things that we forgot to talk about Nano server. Nano server is purely 64-bit. So you cannot install, in the past you used to have the program files x86 and program files, right? So now you cannot install anything that is program files x86 on Nano server. So just 64, and it's really, really stripped down. Just to
You're aware
mention that.
of
Sorry,
the sys internals suite,
the one?
the sys internals suite,
Yeah,
like Process Explorer and all that. There's a new
version. Yeah,
a 64-bit only version of that for the.
Nano. Yeah, I think it's because of Nano server that they've come up with that, because they've not updated it in a very long time. But I'm sure that they got, yeah, people are asking for more things to be able to do. So this is the one that we're talking about the last time. So if I click configure that, wait for it to prepare this. Oh, it may take up to 30 minutes. Yeah, we'll come back to that. Okay, so 32 gig hard drive, 5112 megabyte of RAM, minimum of this one. So obviously we're not going to run with this one because this will only run the OS. If we want to run any application or any load on top of that server, we've got to be more than this one. So we've got to have much more than this one. So one of the things is that also to mention, if you have an RAM that is more than 16 gig, you need more hard disk space. So if your RAM is going to be more than 16 gig, you need a minimum of more than 32 gig. Does anyone know why?
Swap file.
Yep, exactly. Yeah. So, so Shazad and Abdul, does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah, so because it's gonna need to do the swap file virtual memory. So because of that, if you're ever gonna have more than 16 gig, you can't have 32 gig hard drive. You've got to have more than that
Yeah, I got
on it.
found that off the hard way. Had a 120 gig SSD drive, and
Hmm.
then I put 4 gigs of RAM in my server.
Hmm.
So my C drive was full immediately.
Yeah, it's it's absolutely true. Yeah, because it's very easy, right? Because you just think, yeah, I'm just changing the RAM. What impact will this have on me, right? That happens a lot. Uh, Hypervisor.cpu save. Okay, okay, let's move on. Um, Overview of installation options. So this was the one that Benji mentioned earlier. So these are different installation options. So we can either have Windows Server 2016 desktop experience. So this is a bit different. So desktop experience. So you have a Windows server that looks almost like a Windows 10 machine, which is similar to what I showed you earlier here. This one. So it looks almost like a Windows 10 machine because it's a desktop experience server. It's a server that I've installed the old desktop experience on. It's almost like a Windows 10 machine. It's got Internet Explorer and all that. And then you have the option for Server Core. So Server Core is the stripped down version. So you start Windows Server and you get nothing but a command line here. Now there are different tools that you can still use. You can still use PowerShell. You can still use regedit. You can still use something called sconfig to configure it. But really, you don't get anything beyond the command prompt and just a few other things that you can do. But
Task
now,
man,
hello,
I
sorry.
think you can run Task Manager.
Yeah, you can
That's
run Task Manager also. You can run System Info to view information about the system itself and stuff like that. So you can still run a few other things. But apart from that, you got to you can still connect with it via remote desktop. You can still use Windows. We can still have PowerShell remoting to connect to it. So all that will work. So then we've got Nano server now. So one of the things to note, because one of the things that I wanted to demonstrate there, which I may not be able to, but at least I'll show you the steps of deploying Nano server is that Nano server deployment is a bit different because normally when you're deploying Windows server, you put in the ISO, you click next, 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 you get to a screen, it tells you here are the options. You can have server desktop experience or server core. And I must mention that when we're talking about desktop experience, server core, Nano server, we're only referring to two editions. We're only referring to standard and data center. We're not referring to, there's no foundation core or essentials core. We're referring to standard and data center editions, those two. So you don't have an option for Nano server in there. You can go, I want desktop experience, I want server core, and I also want Nano server. No, you cannot have that. You don't have that on the ISO when you're doing the deployment. Nano server deployment is a bit different. You have to deploy from another machine. So to show you a quick illustration of how that works, I was going to set up this Hyper-V host and then deploy from this host, but it's not responding for some reason. So I'll probably just show you the steps from this one. So let's bring up, first of all, I'll connect to this machine and I'll mount the server 2016 ISO on this machine. So let's go to on the download server 2016. Okay. So if I go in here now and I go under my PC, oh, it's not connected maybe. Settings, this one and connected. So let's connect it. Yep, and then we go. And then if I open this server 2016 ISO that I just mounted, in here you see a folder. Is this clear? Can everyone see this? Hello?
Yeah.
Yeah, is it clear? Okay, yeah. Okay. So if you look at this, you see Nano server here. So that is how you deploy Nano server. You don't deploy it from the ISO by going next, next, next. You have to come to this folder. So typically you can copy this folder to a different, maybe I can copy this and copy this to my PC, maybe the C drive. Because within this Nano server folder, I have this WIM file, Windows image file. That is the Nano server WIM file there. So that is how you deploy it. You have a little README here that gives you a link that you can go through to know how to deploy it. So basically, to deploy Nano server, what you have to do is 2 steps. You have to generate a virtual hard drive for Nano server, and then the next step is you have to deploy that hard drive. So those are the 2 steps that you have to follow. So, and the only way to, or the way to generate that virtual hard drive is by using PowerShell. And the PowerShell modules are inside this one here called Nano Server Image Generator. Inside the Nano Server folder on the Server 2016 ISO, you have this Nano Server PowerShell modules or PowerShell module inside here. So let's go through the steps together. So one of the first thing I'll do is I'll bring up Windows PowerShell. I'll run it as an administrator. And then I will first of all import, let me make this bigger. Let's go properties, font, let's have it as 16 or maybe 18. And maybe I'll have it full screen. Okay. Yeah. So first of all, I'll import the Nano server PowerShell module. So import module, and that's in the C drive in the Nano server folder, in the Nano server image generator folder, and then there's the Nano server image generator PowerShell module. And I've run that, which is I've imported this module here. This one inside Nano server image generator, I've imported this module here. And okay, so having imported that, if I go get module and list available module, or if I just get module, it should show up there. I have the Nano server image generator there. So the 2 steps again, or actually let's say 3 steps. Number 1, import the Nano server image generator module. Number 2, create the Nano server VHD. Number 3, deploy the Nano server VHD. So now what I can do is I can now go use Nano server PowerShell command, which is like new Nano server image edition. Here's where I can select the edition. It can either be standard or data center. Let's say data center edition. I'll select the media part. So media part, I'll have to point to where my server 2016 the ISO content where they are. So I have to point to that. So this is in the D drive. So I have to point to the D drive. So I say the media part is D. I'll specify something called the base part. So the base part, the base part is where that Nano server WIM file is. Or actually, so base part is not where the Nano server WIM file is. It's where I want to create this. So let's go to the C drive. Let's create a new folder. Let's call it Nano server VHD. So that is where I want to create this. So if I go in there and I so if this is the place I'm gonna copy this. So on the base part, I select this. Then the target path is I can go nano server VHD nano 1 dot VHD. So I can specify here VHD or VHDX, whichever one I specify. Then I can specify things like the computer name. So this is how you basically deploy a Nano server, is by using PowerShell this way. So I specify a computer name. Let's call it Nano 1 computer name, and the deployment option. So this one, or the deployment type. So deployment type is talking about, do you want to deploy Nano server as a guest inside a VM, or do you want to deploy it as a host on a physical machine? So this one is important. Whatever you want to use it for, that's what you specify here. So having selected all that, I press enter. It asks me for the administrator password for this one. So if I type in an admin password and press enter, then it begins the processing. And at the end of this, what I should have is, under this one, I should have a Nano server VHD under this one. Now I can now take that VHD, I can now deploy it as a virtual machine guest, or I can deploy it as a physical machine. So you can deploy VHD as a physical machine too. So does that make sense? Is that clear?
So you're staging right now. All you're doing is staging on the machine that you're on.
Yep.
The machine you're on, you're just staging the new hard disk.
Yeah, the new hard disk. So it's going to have the name, the deployment type, the edition. So I'm just doing that. So at the end of this, I'll have a VHD file. That VHD file is now what I can deploy. Does that make sense? Is that clear? So number one thing to remember is that you need the Server 2016 ISO. Server 2016 ISO, inside that you'll have this Nano server folder. So number one thing, import the PowerShell module from here. After importing the PowerShell module, next thing is you're going to generate the VHD for Nano server. So using the PowerShell commandlet that I just used there, which is new Nano server image, specify the edition, the media part, specify the name, the deployment type that you want. I've specified host here. I wanted to specify guest, but yeah, whatever. So I specified host here. So that means I can only use this one on a physical machine. But if I had specified guest here, then I can take that VHD. Then after that, I can now go to my Hyper-V machine or VMware vSphere machine and type new virtual machine, specify the name of the virtual machine, and I point it and say the VHD, use this VHD. And that's how you deploy Nano server. Does that make sense? Is that clear?
Yeah, it's clear, sir.
Yeah, nice. Benji, you're still okay? Or is it confusing?
No, I
Yeah,
understand.
yeah,
That's what I was saying. This is just the staging server.
yeah,
So
it is, yeah.
you're just creating the disk in order to put the disk on another
Yeah,
computer.
exactly.
It's just a computer.
Yeah, exactly. But here's one thing that just recently came out. Nano server. So all the things that we did were Nano there. It's called Nano Server Image Builder. That's what it's called. So all the things that we did via PowerShell now, what they've done now is they've released this tool called Nano Server Image Builder, where you can download this, and rather than using PowerShell, you can just go um, run this, you get something like this, where you can either create a Nano server image, create a bootable USB if you're going to be using it for a physical host. If you're going to be using it for a virtual machine, you can use this option one. So which will be host or guest, or this physical host or guest. And then basically you select all the options that we selected using PowerShell. You select the location of the Windows server media source. You select, do you want to use it as a virtual machine or as a physical machine in case you're using it for a Hyper-V host. You select the output, the directory that is going to create the log files, you accept the license, and at the end of it, you just finish all this. Actually, this one can go a step further because with this one, you can actually select the role that you want to install. Oh, I forgot to mention, I forgot this one. So this is one of the other popular things for using Nano server as a web server, IIS. So you select the roles that you want to install or the features that you want to install um, on Nano server image, and by the time you click next, it just generates all that, and now you have everything ready. You can even join it to the domain using this one if you want. So they just recently released this one, so it's a good one. Does that make sense? So you can either use PowerShell. So all these things that they did in here, in the backend, is just running PowerShell. So all the things that we can do with this one, we can also do them. We can also do it using PowerShell. As you can see, at the end of using this one, it gives you the PowerShell command. So you can copy this and use it to generate any image you want to generate later. So everything that we did here, we can do it using PowerShell. But in case you're more familiar with the UI, just download the Nano Server Image Builder and use this to build it. One of the advantages of this one is that you can even use this one to create a bootable USB if you want to use it for a physical machine.
So can you add features? Did you say with the Nano server, how do you it doesn't run PowerShell, or it does run PowerShell, or how do you add?
So it's remote PowerShell. So you can connect to it via PowerShell remotely.
So you can still add the new feature.
Yes, you can. So when you connect to it via PowerShell remotely, it's like connecting to other Windows server remotely using PowerShell. But you cannot use remote desktop. You can't use remote desktop to connect to it, and you can connect to it from the console and get a command line. Does that make sense?
Yep. So you just have to be able to do the PS remoting and then add the feature from PowerShell.
Yes. So after deploying it, you have two options. You can either use PowerShell Direct that we mentioned earlier, or you can use PowerShell Remoting, which is one of the reasons why if you look again at the options that you have in the console of Nano Server, the main options that you have is about how to enable remote access using PowerShell. You can enable WinRM from the remote console. You can enable firewall rules or disable firewall rules, and you can configure network settings, like give it an IP address so that you can connect to it via PowerShell remoting. So those are the only options that you've got. So it's completely managed by PowerShell, either PowerShell Direct or PowerShell remoting. There's no remote desktop, there's no UI. You can, of course, you can always, after, for example, if you install IIS on this, because you have all these different roles that you can install, if you install IIS on it, you can always use the web server console on another machine to connect to it, right? So that will still work. So you can always use that to connect to it. So I'll just bring it up again. So after you deploy the VHD, you get something like this. You can go on the administrator and login. And you get this one. So basically the main reasons for getting this one is I can go configure the networking, make sure that I can connect to it remotely. Then I can go enable firewall rules so that I can connect to it remotely. And I can enable WinRM so I can use PowerShell remoting because that's what it uses. And then after I finish, that's it. I cannot connect to this console from remote desktop. I can only connect to it from this console here. Does that make sense? So I think we'll probably stop here for today because I think we did cover a few things today, right? Any questions so far? Any questions at all? So if I ask you, Shazad, how do you deploy Nano server? Are you clear about how to deploy it now?
Well, still like I will be see some videos more in YouTube. Like
Yeah,
I get the guideline from you,
yeah,
and I will be check some videos and maybe I will be install after this, inshallah.
yeah, yeah. Nice. And what about you, Abdul? Are you okay with it? Are you okay? Are you sure you know the steps, right, to at least deploy the Nano server? I'm not sure if Abdul is online. Hello, Abdul, are you there? And Benji, I'm sure that you're okay, right?
Yeah. Have
Yeah.
you played with the IoT?
Not that much, no, not that much.
It's like I built a Raspberry Pi,
Mm-hmm.
and then I put the Windows 10 IoT on, and I
Yeah.
think it may have made something like a Nano server. Like there were no options.
Yep.
Basically, just like that, like
Yep.
login, and then it just showed the login, and that was it. So I
Yeah.
was like, oh, so I must need some development kit or something to
Yeah.
connect to it.
Yeah.
So it was kind of
Yeah.
as limited.
You think it's the same idea that they just used and moved that over?
Yeah,
Yeah.
there was a last year sometime
Mhm.
before 2016 came out, they had the IoT for Raspberry Pi.
Mhm.
Windows 10 IoT for Raspberry Pi.
Yep.
So and it looked almost identical to that. So it may just be either like I couldn't connect to it at all, so I
Mhm.
just turned it off and reformat.
Yeah. Yep. So yeah, but that's the point. If you look at but actually if you look at this, right, you can look at the power that this brings. So for example, imagine running your web server and it only goes down. If you want to reboot your web server, it's only going to take you like less than 5 seconds to come back up, right? That's something powerful, right? I mean, for Windows, for people that are like Windows admins, they know that that is rare in the Windows world, where you can run it as you can run failover clustering, you can use it as DNS server, you can run it, you can run containers on it, you can have shielded VM support, you can install agents on it, virtual machine, SE VMM agent, you can use partial DSC on it, you can have the Windows anti-malware on it, and you can have Hyper-V on it. So those are the most popular ones. Is Hyper-V, file server role with failover clustering, because then you can have scale out file server. IIS, you can have this as your web server. Very, very light, easy to, quick to deploy. Your deployment time is very, very short. Um, quick to rebuild if you need to rebuild it. If you need to reboot it, maintenance is very, very low because there really is very little that you patch. So it's a very good one. Okay, I think we'll stop here for today. And next time, so just look on the page, community page. I will post information about when we continue with this. So it probably won't be next out there, or it may not be next out there. It may be during the week that I'll continue with this. But at least we've gone so far in talking about this. So we'll continue further next time. Maybe we'll even have the chance to get into storage because there are new features in storage. We have storage spaces direct, and we have storage replica, which are very, very, as Benji mentioned, has to do with convergence, the whole concept of convergence and hyperconvergence in the data center. Okay, thanks very much, guys. If there are no questions, I think we'll just stop there and then we'll meet next time. Have a
Yeah.
wonderful week.
So